AI Workflows with Pierce Boggan.
The AI Devops podcast is a show for those shipping software using AI, .NET, Azure, and Devops. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods and sharing success stories. Sponsoring the podcast is ClearMeasure, a software architecture and engineering firm that implements AI to empower software teams to establish quality, achieve stability, and increase speed. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping you and your teams move fast and deliver quality and to run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything that AI, Azure, and the .NET ecosystem has to offer. I'm really excited about our guest for today, Pierce Boggan. He is the PM lead for Visual Studio Code and GitHub Copilot at Microsoft, where he guides the product direction of the world's most popular code editor as it evolves into an AI native development platform. He joined Microsoft through the Xamarin acquisition more than a decade ago, and he's worked across mobile tools, Visual Studio, and Teams, and all kinds of things at Microsoft, taking the helm of VS Code sometime in 2024 or thereabouts. Pierce also co-hosts the VS Code Insiders podcast, and he's presented at GitHub Universe 2025 as a keynote presenter and all kinds of other conferences, and recently helped his team make the historic shift from monthly to weekly releases, all, of course, implementing AI, and he's also the creator of Primer, an open source CLI that prepares code bases for AI-assisted development. Pierce, so glad to have you on the show. How are you, sir?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm fantastic. It was really great seeing you in person just a little bit less than a month ago at the MVP
great.
Summit, and glad that we can make it work on the podcast. Before we kind of dive into some of the things going on in the industry, I always like to ask the guest, you've done a whole lot and have a lot of experience in the industry. Go back in time a little bit. What is it about technology and custom software in particular that just keeps you motivated and interested in this field?
Wow. Good question. I think for me, it's maybe one of those things where, in more physical good kind of spaces, I always knew I wanted to pursue engineering. And I think I'm a very impatient person. And the interesting thing about software, of course, that tests my patience all the time. But the great thing is that when you have an idea or you want to explore something, it's actually, in the grand scheme of things, very trivial for me to pursue any idea, right? So that was what I always thought was interesting about software is I always felt of course, there is time. You have to go write the code. You have to actually build the thing. But to some extent, I felt with software, my limitation was my creativity. And that was super cool. I can express my creativity every single day, especially now with AI, right? I can go from idea to actually having something running very quickly. And that wasn't ever really true for any other discipline, right? There was always a massive ramp-up process. There might be fixed constraints that take a while, whether it's materials or whatever it is to actually get what you need. And with software, you can literally create anything that comes into your mind, which is both really empowering, but also can be quite overwhelming. But I think that's ultimately what I really like about this field and why I've chosen to stay in it throughout all these years.
Yeah, well, that's for sure. Lots of things going on. You can create all kinds of, the materials are not bound by typical physics. So that's, really interesting.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And I mean, when I first got into development, it was mobile apps, right? And to me, that was very personal because this was 2010, 2011. It wasn't quite clear what was going to happen with the phones yet, but it was cool that now I have an operating system I can build for that I can take with me anywhere. And I mean, it's hilarious looking back at how naive some of the apps I was building back then are. I remember there's beer drinking apps and silly things like that people would build in the early days of the App Store. But for me, that it was very personal, right? Because you can build whatever app you want, you could put it on your own phone, and you could take it with you everywhere, right? And that was what really kind of sparked my interest in this space. And then, like you said, in the intro, it's kind of evolved for me over time, what I found interesting. But I think the core remains is I love solving cool problems, and I feel if we can dream it, then we can build it, right?
Right. Well, Microsoft just announced the schedule of sessions for the Microsoft Build Conference, and I know it's going to be a really exciting conference, but that seems so far away in AI time. So just recently, more announcements, new features in Copilot. In your world with AI in VS Code and Copilot for listeners who maybe haven't checked up on news in the last couple of weeks, so they're way behind with the AI news. Can you catch us up? What's like the latest things that have just come out where people are need to catch up a little bit?
Yeah. So, I mean, like the crazy thing about this space is like if you stop paying attention for what feels like a day or a week or especially a month, like it feels like you like have lost track of what's happening because it's moving so quickly, which is its own level of exhaustion, I will admit, as keeping up with just everything happening in the space. But like taking a step back, like we kind of evolved in general for AI separate from any tool, right? Like we went from, okay, now we're using AI to help complete a couple lines of code in the editor. It's kind of cute, right? To oh wow,
Yeah.
now it's actually helping me to do bigger things, to okay, now I'm using an agent that's helping me do one thing at a time. Now we see people using multiple agents at once, right? And so I think, the interesting thing about the last couple months for us on GitHub Copilot is we've just been continuing, okay, what is the next thing we need now that we're kind of in this stage of development? And on the VS Code team, it's a lot of, we're seeing people partner at an increasingly higher level with agents, right? It used to be like, it was funny when we first shipped agent, the first version, everyone's like, oh, well, how do I understand what is happening? I need to literally follow every single little thing that it's doing. And now you talk to people, and of course, some people are still at that point in their AI journey, but there is a lot more trust built up with the agent, right? Especially if you're doing proactive planning and things like that. And so that kind of results in some interesting things if you have more trust in the agent, right? You need the agent to be able to run securely, right? If you're going to supervise it less and not make sure that it's doing whatever it can. So we've been working on a sandbox inside of VS Code so we can execute both the native built-in tools for Copilot, but also MCPs and things like that safely inside of an isolated sandbox. So that's been one thing. We've been exploring verification workflows. So if I'm going to run multiple agents at once, you can, when you're running one at a time, okay, npm run build, okay, I'm going to try it. Does it do the thing, right? When you start scaling yourself beyond this, that's your limiter, right? Is being able to test the thing. And so what we've been trying to do in VS Code is like, how can we actually build those flows natively into the product? So we started integrating a browser into VS Code, which was a big step. But that browser can basically self-validate that the app actually, the agent actually did what you want, right? So imagine if you're like, add this page to my app, it needs to look like this and do these things. The way that agents used to work and still do, we've just kind of hacked them a bit, is the agent runs in a loop until it's decided that it fixed your goal. And in many cases, that is, I think I wrote the code that does this and it compiles, right?
Yeah.
But now with verification, you can actually have the agent, okay, don't just stop there, right? Boot the app, actually drive navigation of the app, take screenshots, validate that my actual intent was solved, not just that you wrote the code that does the thing. And so we've done that. We built some other modes inside of GitHub Copilot, like autopilot, which is basically a more forceful way to make sure that the agent is really actually solving the problem and not prematurely stopping before it's really solved your whole problem. Then in Copilot CLI, we've been exploring like how can we basically allow you to take your session with you anywhere. So we have remote support announced at the time of this recording today. So you can basically, if you start a session on your machine, you have to go to lunch or do something else. You can fire it off with /remote if you already have the session going on. That basically creates a web link that you can open in GitHub mobile app on the web and basically continue to steer that session when you're not actively at your machine. So I think this is like another evolution of this, is like this continuity across all of your devices, right? As you move from thing to thing. The other thing that I'm kind of excited about is we've been exploring on the harness engineering side how we can get even better results with these agents, right? So many agents are vendor specific, so they only support OpenAI models or only support Anthropic models. But one of the cool things about GitHub Copilot is we actually support models from different providers, right? And so one concept we've been exploring lately is like, how can we use that like to our advantage, right? And so we introduced this thing called Rubber Duck. And so essentially what it does is it will use one agent to kind of grade the other agent's work and suggest improvements and things like that. And we found on our hardest problems, this was resulting in like a 5% increase in resolution rate in our offline evaluations, which doesn't sound like that impressive. 5%, you're like, that's not a huge improvement. When you see how much engineering goes into like getting very marginal improvement in this harness, 5% is a quite massive increase. there's already features like this in Copilot CLI, like /review, which uses adversarial reviews. You can spin up multiple models, have them grade each other's reviews and generate their own reviews to get really high quality code results. So yeah, like we've been exploring a lot of things on the harness side as well to kind of figure out how we can give you the best results. So there's been a lot of things happening, and that's just really like the last month or so. TBD on what next week will look like or the week beyond, but like I'm pretty excited about the progress of the team and like how we're enabling you to focus at a higher level with these agents.
Yeah. Well, thanks for catching us up. You mentioned the remote feature just released earlier today, and I just was able to do a quick check because I've been doing like dev tunnel. Everybody's been trying to how can I remote into my computer so that I can SSH or any kind of things. And now this one is just command, okay, boom. Now I just take it with me on my phone. Because remote cloud sessions, they're useful for some things, and GitHub agent will do that, but it starts over in the context and it goes to sleep pretty aggressively. But we always have these powerful computers that it's on my desk, and so that's a really cool feature.
And I think there's a different partnership, right, for a local versus a cloud agent, right? Like with local, it's more of, even if you're backgrounding it, it's more of a synchronous partnership where you're occasionally checking in, right? Whereas with the cloud agents, it is more kind of fire and forget. And both of those models have pros and cons, right? The nice thing I like about this one is you kind of get a little bit of both. So you can, you're not totally constrained if you need to go somewhere or do something to continuing that session, and you can still give it the input it needs, right? So I find it to be a happy medium between two for me.
I tell you what, just since January, I've been going to the gym more because I realized that I can keep something going and I can have it on my phone, and regardless of what I'm doing, I can check on it in between sets. And it sounds like a joke, but it's actually real for me.
Yeah, no, like this is very possible for us now, right? And I think it goes back to that like up-leveling your partnership with agents conversation, right? Like if you were like, I literally need to be paying close attention to every single thing this agent is doing, then that's not a possible workflow. But if you kind of allow yourself to like kind of think at a higher level of almost like this is a teammate that I'm delegating to, and I trust this person to go and at least give a first attempt. Maybe I have to give them more feedback, right? But at least go do a first attempt on a solution, then that really frees you to like go and do other things, like go to the gym. It's a very serious thing. Like I've been doing a lot of bike rides and things like that. I live in Utah, and same thing. Like I'm, occasionally like I'll use like voice or something to be like, go do this or explore this. And I don't know. There's also something about exercise that also gets your brain going in terms of ideas. So I find that like actually I have a lot of my best ideas when I'm exercising. So it's nice to be able to quickly delegate to the agents when I have one.
I want to ask you about workflow, because your team and of course customers that you're supporting and the product, you're doing a lot of thinking about how does this change how we work. And so the software development lifecycle as a concept has been around for multiple decades, and it's now Agile changed it from batching to single piece flow, but there's a set of stages. We have to think about what we want and then do some type of scoping, do some type of design. You got to make some decisions so that the right code to write. And then after you have some code, you got to do some steps of, is it right? Should I put it in front of the customer? So in your mind, with all these workflows, what in the software development lifecycle stays the same? And is there any step that fundamentally changes in the AI world?
I approach this question very humbly because we're still trying to figure this out ourselves on the VS Code team, right? And of course, it doesn't help AI is speeding things up even more and changing workflows every single day. And so getting any sort of stable understanding of how the software development lifecycle will change is kind of an interesting idea. I can kind of speak about like what I've noticed on our team and where I noticed the bottlenecks showing up for us. So I think, if code is very trivially cheap to produce, and we could add any feature to GitHub Copilot or Copilot CLI or VS Code, right? Then obviously I'm sure people have seen those diagrams of like, if the customer asks for the solution, if the customer asked for this, like the iPhone, if the customer designed this and we listen to every single request, right?
Yeah.
Like with AI, that was not really a practical outcome, right? Because you had limitations, but like now with AI, you can move much faster. And so actually like, it's very counterintuitive. Like when agents first came out, I was like, oh, well, great. I have no more meetings. I hate meetings, right? Like I don't want to spend any time in meetings. But like actually, it's kind of the opposite on our team. I find myself spending more time in meetings, and not like useless meetings, like helpful meetings. Because if we can produce anything, then kind of the question becomes like, well, like what should we actually do? What should we focus on? What are our differentiators? So like a lot of the product thinking becomes really, really even more important, right? You used to write this doc, like many PMs write a doc like every quarter, every semester, every year. This is our vision, right? Like you can't do this anymore. The delivery life cycle has been compressed to weeks or in some cases days, right? Or even multiple times a day. And so you're constantly having to ask this question, what's next, right? And for many teams, I think that's going to be the new limiter is like, how quickly can you decide what's next? And what is your taste on deciding what's next? And that's not really like a software engineering thing. I mean, it is, but like it's a product question, right? But that's like counterintuitively what we spend a lot of time doing. Okay, first couple of hours of every day, I'm in meetings and we're basically discussing this. I mean, generally more targeted than like, what should we do today? But like, that's the basic idea. It's like, okay, where are we going? What do we need to add? How is this different than yesterday? How is the space evolving? And that's kind of how we're thinking. And so you spend a lot more time kind of in these big discussions where you're really kind of like hammering out these ideas with the team. And then, okay, you end your meeting and then you spend the day executing. You come back at the end of the day and say, spend some time with it. Is this what I actually want, right? Is this the direction we need to go? And so I spend a lot more time there. And then at the end as well, right? So for us on the VS Code team, like we were never, the term PR review is very like overloaded, I think. It means different things to different people. On our team, we were never super sacrimonious about like, oh, you can't, do this with the code. It has to be this specific form. We had code rules and stuff like that. But, you generally would not see PRs rejected for super trivial things. We would trust people generally with the PRs they submit. Now the problem is, if anyone can send a PR for anything, like I can send a PR to another area owner in the VS Code team, right? Previously, maybe I don't know anything about the architecture for that area. Now I can send a PR. Well, now the PR review kind of in some ways also becomes like your last block, right? This is the last opportunity for us before something makes its way into the code base to decide, is this idea actually something we want in the code base? And so for us, actually, when we talk about like PR and code review being the limiting thing, it's not even just actually the more traditional aspects of like code quality, testing, those sorts of things. It's also like an endorsement of the idea and reasoning about like, do I want this PR to actually live? When we merge this, now we have to maintain this code. Now it has to be performant. We'll get bug reports. They may create more work for us, right? Even with AI, that's the work that has to be done. So that's actually like the other counterintuitive thing is it's like PR review is worse for us now, but not in the way you would expect. It's more like, okay, if I'm now sending PRs to any area owner in VS Code, now they have to think about this as well, right? On the other side. So yeah, like that's kind of an interesting thing is like on our team, at least, is someone really embracing agents. Like if execution's cheap, that's all this other stuff that really is quite cognitively taxing to reason about. And that's like something that, to be honest, I don't have an answer for yet, but the way that we've done it is we divide our team up into work streams. We're meeting daily about our particular focus area. And we're reasoning like, okay, for this area, what should we do? And what should we not do, more importantly? So yeah, that's kind of like how and this is over the last couple months, really since January, how our team has had to evolve. We're doing like 2.5 to 3x more PR throughput, which that's we can argue about that as a productivity metric, but I think it's directionally correct that like we're doing more as a team. And that has resulted in us having to reason about like, what are the things we should be doing much more than before.
Yeah. And just out of curiosity, you mentioned just since January, is there a particular model choice that most of the time your team elects to use?
Yeah, it changes all the time. There's no constant. So we did start publishing, we can put the link in the show notes. We have a metric we track internally called commit rate from agent. And basically that is the percentage of the code that is generated by the agent that actually makes its way into a commit. So we used to track this metric code survival, which was kind of the same thing, but a little bit lower signal because we found that a lot of people were just like, you delegate to your agent, you leave your machine. It's like, okay, well, what interval? Maybe you don't like the code, but you just haven't come back to review it yet, right? But we thought that like, okay, well, if it's committed, that's like a higher signal, right? Because you're kind of saying like, there's at least some endorsement of this. It's not the same as a merge PR, but like you're saying like, I feel pretty good about this. So with the latest generation of models, pretty much across the board, we're seeing 80+% commit rate, 80% plus. So 80% of the code that the agent is generating is being committed right now.
Yeah.
So for us, like it kind of depends. Like I would say like I do generally like Opus for like a lot of front-endy things. It's pretty good at that. The GPT-5.4 model I use for kind of a lot of back-end work. And admittedly, like I'm also helped by the fact that we have a ton of offline evaluation that we run on all these models before we ship, right? There's a ton of hardness optimization that goes in. And so based off the problems it does well on, we actually know like generally it's good at this. it's less good at this. But directionally, like all the latest models are quite capable, right? I think if you look online, you would think that you should never use anything other than Opus. I think you have to consider that there's other things that you think about when you're using agents. Like even if you're delegating, like you don't want to just be waiting indefinitely for things. And Opus is a great model. It's very intelligent, but it also has one of the longer turn times. So the total amount of time the agent runs. Well, as much as we like to think all of our tasks are extremely complex, that's not true, right? And so
Yeah.
it can be OP. And I don't even mean from just a cost perspective. I mean from like your time and how you value your time perspective of just running everything with Opus. But I would generally say like always be on the latest generation of the models from OpenAI, from Gemini, and from Anthropic. And if you do that, you're already probably in the 90th plus percentile of outcomes you'll get with the agent.
Nice. The problem of lots of pull requests, and now you have to evaluate them. And you ask the question, did we do an architectural shift? Is this related in any way to your thinking around your Primer project?
In some ways, yeah. Like I think, so Primer, it's now, classic software engineering. Naming is the hardest thing. It's now called Agent RC. Apparently GitHub already had something named Primer. And
Okay.
I had actually asked the agent to name it.
Gotcha.
And it came up with Primer, and I thought that was a good thing. So this is basically, it started as like, I was doing all these customer visits and still do. And on the VS Code team, it's very interesting because, we're talking to developers every single day and issues and social media, but you kind of get a different perspective when you talk to like a company, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I hear individual developer pain all the time. I'm a developer. I feel that pain as well. But like when you're talking to a CTO or someone in charge of making their whole team successful with AI, they often tell you a different set of challenges. And so it was kind of eye-opening for me when I started doing these visits earlier this year, because every single team was basically saying like, our big challenge is bootstrapping all of these repos to get them ready for AI, right?
Mm.
And we can argue about like, what's the right level of like, what does it actually mean to get a repo ready for AI? I think that some people like go way overboard and they have like these ridiculous documents that are like 50,000 lines. That's not actually going to produce better outcomes with the agent. And I honestly think it's kind of performative of like, I like at how optimized our setup is. Honestly, just basic details, like give the agent a code base map. If there's anything you don't want it to do, document that, like those sorts of patterns, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of has to be an incremental thing that is very built by the team, right? Over time and your experience with the agent. It's not a static document. And so what Agent RC/Primer aims to do is basically like, okay, like I have a lot of teams in every organization. To varying degrees, they're good at AI. So how do I tell them, what does a good instruction look like? It's kind of hard to say, and it's very personal to the team. And so I built this tool because I wanted to basically figure out how we could do the initial bootstrapping. But then, of course, there's this question of like, okay, I have a rule file. How do I actually know it's any better, right? And what does better mean, right? Better doesn't necessarily always mean the agent is better at answering questions about the specific thing. It could mean that. But it could also mean, oh, like the agent used to take 10 minutes for this query, but because I've given it a map of where to look for certain things, it actually takes 5 minutes now. And multiplied over our entire team, that's an incredibly productive improvement, right? So this Primer thing also has evals built in using the GitHub Copilot SDK, which is basically our Copilot CLI harness wrapped up as an SDK. And so you can basically go run your own evals. You can define, here's a question, here's the answer I expect. Agent RC/Primer will go run that thing and basically spit out a ton of metrics in terms of resolution rate, yes, but also in terms of turn time and things like that, and say, is this better or worse than it was without instructions, right? And so that was kind of the inspiration for this project, is like, I was seeing all these teams really struggle with this problem. And not that it, you run one command and it's perfect and you never have to touch it again, because that's not the intention. It's directional correctness is the goal, right? Like, let's bootstrap you. Let's figure out where it does and doesn't work well. Let's work on improving that over time with the instruction, and let's be able to measure that. And so that's essentially what I wanted to enable at scale when I built this project.
Do you know how many actual code bases at Microsoft it's being used in the DevOps pipeline?
Yeah, a lot. Yeah. So we have a team called One Engineering System here at Microsoft.
Mm-hmm.
And they're kind of in charge of like all of the typical things you would imagine that would be company-wide. Like, how can we make sure like all the right security things are done for every single pull request and stuff like that? How do we make sure all of our engineers are productive? So they like set up our cloud dev boxes with the right tools and make sure they're maintained and all of those sorts of things. So we've been working with them, and they work with a lot of other teams to basically say, okay, how can we get our repos AI ready? Because you might imagine Microsoft has 80,000 engineers. And we tried to be super AI forward, and I would hope that all of our code bases would be AI ready. But the reality is, when you have 80,000 people, that's not going to be the case, right?
Yeah.
And so we've been working with that team to basically say, how can we get the percentage of repositories where this is true where we have basic kind of AI readiness in place for the repo up to like close to 100% for any active repo. So that's been a major effort for us internally. And then of course it's up to the team. I can't say what does good look like for your repo because I don't understand what sort of things you might ask the agent, right? So then it's up to kind of the team to go and take that further. But at least the initial bootstrapping, we've been working with our kind of central engineering systems enablement team to try and roll this out across our entire team.
Nice. So it's well-established usage in Microsoft itself. And I think
Yes.
on the outside world, they call the one ES team the maybe platform engineering or
Yes.
DevOps strategy or something.
Yes.
So with it being in place, should people go to the open source, to the GitHub repository and download it, or should they be getting it from somewhere else officially?
So for now, the best place to get it is github.com/Microsoft/agentrc. We'll also put it in the show notes. But we're working on kind of packaging up a little bit better. And ultimately, like our goal, like building a CLI is very cheap to do and I can do it myself. But the goal is basically that eventually we kind of evolve this tool and it makes its way into kind of like the admin experience for GitHub Copilot. Like as an admin, I should be able to say, these are my top repos. They're not AI ready, right? Let me go work with those people to make it better. And so ultimately, like where we want to get is like, of course, there's bottoms up motion with the individual developers to get their things ready. And we have a ton of things we've done in VS Code, for example, like we have like /create skill and things like that so that like we can help you bootstrap your repo with customizations at the level. But then we also want kind of the top down from the platform engineering lead or whoever it is to basically be able to look across their whole team and get these really actionable insights on like, these repos are not AI ready. These settings are turned off. You should turn these on because this is the difference in outcomes we see when people turn these on. Another example would be like the models, right? You haven't enabled the latest generation of models. Here's how much intelligence you're leaving on the team for your table, right? The sorts of things that we really kind of want to evolve the app to be. So I expect that we'll end up incorporating it more into that experience as well, and it won't just be available as a CLI.
Nice. You know, one thing you mentioned about you could do it yourself. So for the longest time, I was used to not only Microsoft, but engineering organization industry-wide, you'd have product managers or program managers. You have one role that was to think about what we should do some analysis, and then a different role to actually be in the code and actually do commits. And maybe you throw across a proof of concept, but that wasn't production code. Now it seems like you and your role is you're actually making real branches, and those end up actually creating a pull request.
That's correct. Yeah.
So with my question on how software development lifecycle is changing, or are we compressing the structure of a software team?
Yeah. I used to always think it was a little silly about like member of technical staff as a role. You're like, they all have the same title. Okay. Speaking of performative, it felt a little performative, I'm being honest. But then like just seeing how our own team has changed, like, of course, I still ultimately accountable for things relating to the product management role. But like how I do my job is totally different, right? Maybe I used to write a doc that no one would read, if I'm being intellectually honest, about like what we should do or like what a product experience should look like. There's many problems with this, right? Like at best, even if you have really good taste, basically it's all hypothetical that you're putting into this doc of what the experience should look like.
Yeah.
Now, me or anyone on the PM team can go and actually create the experience you want. They can spend a day with that build, right? And they can say like, this is what I like, this is what I don't like. You can actually like refine the idea, right? Before you even take it to something that you would want as engineering. And then I would say maybe 50% of the time, I submit a PR and it's actually just fine. So we just merge it in. And the other 50%, it's like, okay, this isn't fine, but to me, I kind of view my PR as a spec in a way, right? Of like, this is the experience I want to deliver. You could distill like a plan from the implementation I did in terms of the deliverables. The engineer who understands the architecture, the performance characteristics, things like that can actually shape it a little bit better than I could. And they could basically just reprompt my implementation and very trivially produce a new PR that actually solves for all the problems in my original one. So yeah, like we see this on our team. Like I merged the new forking feature, chat forking in VS Code. That's my feature. I merged that in. People complain to me on Twitter. I'm like, it is annoying we don't have chat forking. Let me go do that. And then next thing we know, it's added to the product, right? Courtney on our team has added a ton of things. Harold has done a ton of improvements to plan mode. Isidore has done a ton of improvements to the harness and model quality. So that is a core expectation for everyone on our PM team. is that you are capable of making contributions to the code base. Same thing for our designers, right? The designers built all of the new themes that we just shipped inside of VS Code. It wasn't them dictating, like making some Figma mocks and sending them off to engineering. No, they built the experience. A lot of the new
Nice.
UX for like the multi-chat stuff, that's actually contributed by our design team directly into the product.
Nice.
And I would say on engineering, it changes as well, right? Like as an engineer, oftentimes you have to be so stuck in the details that you don't really, even if you have ideas about the product, it's hard to exercise your product thinking, right? And now I'm seeing like a lot more engineers basically be PMs for their areas, which I think is awesome, right? So like all of our role definitions are collapsing to some extent. And then I think the question is like, well, what are you ultimately accountable for as an individual, right? Like what am I accountable for? What is the design team accountable for? What is the engineering team accountable for? Maybe this also shifts over time. At least as of right now, it's still largely the same in terms of our accountability structure. Maybe how we get there is slightly different. But yeah, it's been really interesting to see just on our team how everything has changed in terms of like the role evolution on the team.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned it as part of Agent RC, but also the pace at which commits and pull requests can come through is going faster. The number of people that could provide a useful pull request, that pace is getting faster. And so it seems like the rate at which we could have accidental architecture shifts or accidentally changing some pattern, which functionally it's no big deal, but at scale, it makes a difference because it was designed that way. So in this world, what types of architectural what types of pictures do you find are really relevant and absolutely useful so that everybody involved can kind of understand the intended shape of the code base that we're looking at, as opposed to like, reading 500 pages all the time just to try to get a picture in my head?
It's kind of an interesting question. Yeah, like I think the challenge is like on an individual PR basis, you can make sure the right things are happening, right? Okay, the tests are good, the performance doesn't degrade, we can have performance tests, things like that. But then I think it's an interesting question at scale, right? Like that drift, to your point. Like even if each individual PR is actually fine. And it's harder now because we used to have area owners on the VS Code team, like code ownership, right? Okay, I touch the workbench. Okay, there's a workbench owner. Okay, I touch Monaco. There's a Monaco owner. Okay, I touch Electron. There's an Electron owner, right? Well, now the ownership structure is kind of broke down. So it's kind of failing in that way, right? Like at scale with all these things coming into play. So I actually wonder, like, we're kind of experimenting with different techniques on the team. But I wonder if where we'll get is we'll also have kind of separate from the PR loop, we'll have agents kind of running continuously, right? That are checking for these sorts of things. Like, are we drifting architecture from some stated document of this is how we want to think about this, right? Is performance slowly drifting in the wrong direction, right? Like these are the sorts of things that I feel like you almost, like you might have a QA team, right? Or you might have an architect who's monitoring these things. So translating that to an agent, you would have like an architect agent that would be constantly monitoring the architectural change over time and making sure you're okay with that, right?
Yeah.
For now, it's been okay because we do still somewhat have this like code ownership thing. So if anything really terrible was to happen in terms of architectural drift, that person would catch it because the PR is auto-assigned to person who owns that code area. So for now, that's good. But how does that work? Okay, now we're doing, 2-3x PR throughput. If we're doing 10x, okay, now that person suddenly can't do this anymore, right? So I think this is where like the frontier of agents is right now, is figuring out how you can do all those things, maintain really high quality, maintain really high performance, make sure your architecture stays sound, right? Because especially as you're doing more PRs, if the architecture does get really unsound over time, right, then it's going to be very painful to work that back, right? So yeah, it's kind of an interesting question and one that we're still exploring on the VS Code team.
Nice. Yeah, it's moving so fast. Just really since January, like David Fowler put it, I had my Opus moment where things clicked.
No, it's a real thing. Like I talk with people all the time and they maybe had used agents before, but until Opus came out over the holidays. And I also think like having a couple weeks where you don't have work and you can play with things on projects and things like that I always joke with Kai, like I feel like the 2 weeks we weren't working over the holidays were the most productive 2 weeks for our team actually, because everybody got the chance like to not be burned by their day-to-day work stuff and to just go spend time with us and really push what is possible, right? Yeah. And like we see this in all of our data, like since basically December, everything's exponentially ramping in terms of how people use agents.
Yeah. So as we kind of get to the end of our time here and close up, one final question, since you're over VS Code, but also Copilot, CLI. So what is the future of the integrated development environment? Because you got all these different user experiences that end up creating a pull request that's just going and working out and talking to your phone versus the IDE, whatever shape that takes. So you've thought about that, but what do you think?
Well, we have a couple explorations internally of like how this needs to evolve. Like I think about this all the time, right? Like VS Code is a code editor, but what happens if you don't look at the code anymore, right? Then is it a code editor, right? What does it need to be, right? It's a lot of the things that we started this conversation talking about, right? Like, okay, like how do I think about up-leveling my partnership with agent and the different things I need for that, and how does the UX need to evolve for this? I think the UX is still very much like I feel very comfortable and like, okay, we need sandbox, we need remote execution, we need continuity, we need verification. Like I feel like those will continue the trend for like the agentic development environment and what that is. The UX is like the big open question to me because I still am very unsatisfied with like just chats all over the place. Like every single coding agent product is just chats. And to me, I said it on Twitter the other day, like I feel someone will eventually do something that is not that. And it'll be it'll click for all of us and we'll feel like idiots because we didn't think of it because it's so obvious in retrospect, right? But like the chat concept, you really can't parallelize yourself more than like 4 or 5 chats at a time. Like it's too much cognitively taxing to get beyond this, right? So I think there's like a limitation there that we really need to think through is like, what is the UX for these agents? Especially if you get multi-agent and they're talking to each other and doing all that, like how do you actually even visualize that, right? But then I think there's like a different question, which we've been exploring a lot on our team, which is basically like this whole like, how do you decide what's next? Like that's the other problem with agents. Like, okay, I can go spin up 10 agents, but what are they actually doing important work? Are they just doing 10 agents to spin up 10 agents, right? So then there's like almost like this element of the ADE that also needs to help me reason about in a world where I have so much chaos, all my teammates are sending all these PRs, the code's changing all the time, we have tons of issues coming in all the time, right? Everything's accelerating, I can build anything. Okay, well then actually like something that helps me to reason about what I actually do next is very valuable. And this is one of the reasons I'm really optimistic about GitHub is I think we have a lot of the primitives in place. They need to evolve, but I think we have a lot of the primitives in place to help me reason about that. And so I think also that has to be part of the ADE is like helping me to manage all this cognitive running all these agents, running into any individual agent and what I actually need for that. The bigger problem is also like, what I'm actually finding myself hitting the limits of. It's like my brain can't take more than a couple of these at once, right? It's starting to get overwhelmed.
Yep. You use the term AD. Can you define that for the listeners?
Agentic development environment. Yeah. So like if you're, we have an integrated development environment, but there's various takes on what an agentic development environment would look like and how that might need to be different than a lot of the dev tools we've used in the past as engineers.
Yeah.
So everyone has their own thoughts. And of course, the pace at which this space is moving also like complicates this. But like I think you'll start to see some things from our team that kind of show in the very near future what we believe this to be. And we'll be putting out some experiments. So definitely stay tuned in terms of like, okay, I just mentioned all the problems. We're doing more than ever with AI. We're partnering a ton with agents. Like the magic that made like GitHub and VS Code is like we experience all the problems that you experience, right? And we're building also for ourselves and also for you. And so all these problems that we talk about with agents, we've experienced firsthand. And so we have a couple attempts that we hope to share more about soon that kind of are our first exploration into this ADE space.
Nice. And I know there's going to be a lot of information at the Build conference, which will include a link to the show notes as well. So Piers, man, thanks for coming on the show and having such a great chat with me about AI.
Thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure. And until next time, dear listener, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the AI DevOps podcast. You can find us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and everywhere else. Visit our sponsor, ClearMeasure, at clearmeasure.com. And on behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.